Click for IB Biology, topic B3.2 Transport. We're looking at transport in plants and we're looking at the transportation of water, which is known as transpiration. In this particular video, we're going to be looking at the uptake of water in the roots. There's a PDF of this presentation that's linked into the description below the video, and there you will also find 10 questions with answers, and you can use that to evaluate your progress with this topic. So the uptake of water in the roots occurs in what is known as the root hair zone. And those root hairs are a consequence of extensions from the epidermal cells. Here we have the root in cross-section, and the wall of the cells in the epidermis, many of them have this extension, and such an extension is a clear indication that we have an increase in the surface area, and that surface area increase is for the absorption of water and associated minerals. And so those minerals include things like nitrates, phosphates, potassium, chloride ions, and so forth. And these are taken up simultaneously as with the water, dissolved in the water. The arrangement of tissues in the cross-section of the root has the epidermis, as previously mentioned, with its specialized root hair cells, which are here. And then we have cortical cells, which extend inward to a tissue known as the endodermis. And then within the endodermis are the xylem and the phloem. The endodermis, xylem, and phloem are often referred to as the stele. Water has two routes in order to traverse the cortex. One is to make its way through the cell walls by capillarity. That's known as the apoplastic pathway. And the other pathway available to water is to follow the symplastic pathway, which is to go from one vacuole to another as it goes to the endodermis. Once it arrives at the endodermis, there's a separate mechanism for moving the water into the xylem beyond, and we'll look at that in due course. Water in soil surrounds particles, clay particles, and those clay particles attract the minerals which are attached to it electrostatically. And the interesting role that root hair cells play is to secrete from the cells of the root into the soil water protons. So this is an active process consuming ATP. The protons are pumped into the water. The acidification of that water displaces the minerals from the clay particles, and then with membrane pumps, these can then be taken into the cytoplasm of the root hair cell. This movement of minerals in this direction lowers the water potential of the root hair cell, and then we have a gradient, a water potential gradient from high to low, and the water can then move through aquaporins in the cell membrane into the root hair cell. And in so doing, we have the movement of both the minerals and the soil water has been taken up. Now, the water can then traverse the cortex by the two pathways previously mentioned. You'll recall that moving from cytoplasm to cytoplasm is known as the Symplastic pathway, and this is promoted by cytoplasmic connections between the adjacent cells, and those connections are small enough to allow the movement of water but not of organelles, and those connections are called Plasmodesmata. You may remember that from your cell biology lessons. The water moving here A to B to C to D is moving across a water potential gradient until it encounters the endodermis. The alternative pathway, as previously mentioned, is the apoplastic pathway, and in this case the water is moving by capillarity through the tissues of the cell walls like so, and avoiding the insides of the cells. However, once it encounters the endodermal tissue, shown here, within the wall of the endodermal tissue, there is a waterproof, water-repellent layer known as the Casparian strip, and that is composed of a substance called Suberin. Now, this Suberin forces the water and the minerals through the cell membrane, where it is all being selectively controlled, before it can actually pass this particular tissue. And so the endodermis, by driving the water and the minerals through the cell membrane, can exert control over what does and does not enter into the central stele over here. As the water moves past the endodermis with its dissolved minerals, it is then loaded into the xylem. This loading process into the xylem is performed by some cells called pericycular cells, and they too have pumps in their cell membrane, and they will then actively transport, with the consumption of ATP, the minerals such as chlorides and potassiums and various other minerals actively into the space of the xylem. And so I've drawn this also vertically here, so we're pumping into this location, into the xylem. We're putting potassium and chloride ions and nitrate and so forth. And of course, what this is doing is creating a low water potential. And with a low water potential on the inside of the xylem and a high water potential in the pericycular cells, water then follows the minerals by the process, of course, of osmosis. This loading of water into the xylem actually creates what is known as a root pressure, which is to say a positive upward pressure from the roots towards the stem. It is possible to perform this experiment where we cut off the main part of the stem and replace it with this capillary glassware and fill this with liquid. And then, given a period of time and water absorption into the roots here, that water will add to the column here and here, pushing the water column upward like so. And of course, if it's in this, it's possible to actually calculate and evaluate those pressures. And interestingly, whilst those pressures do contribute to transpiration, they are not sufficiently high pressures to be able to move water up to the stem and up into the leaves. That requires the force of evapotranspiration to create the tension and the suction of the water upwards. But the root pressure does contribute. In some small plants, which grow close to the ground like so, when the humidity is high and when the temperature is low, what can sometimes happen is that in the low-lying leaves, water droplets can emerge onto the leaf surface like so, as the root pressure pumps the water from low down in here up into the leaves like so, and droplets of water will actually form on the leaf's surface, and this is a process known as guttation. This completes our study of the uptake and movement of water through plants. Our next video, which is linked in, switches to the consideration of the movement of organic molecules in the phloem tissue, a process known as translocation. Please do subscribe to the channel, it does encourage, and the playlist is on the right hand side here for your convenience.